give a brief introduction to the background of Buddhism as it emerged as a system of philosophy and also a way of life, a spiritual way of life. Now, as I mentioned in the last session, Buddhist philosophy had two phases of evolution, developments. First one, just after Buddha's passing away, there was the first Buddhist council in which some of the surviving disciples of Buddha, they recalled Buddha's original teachings. And of course, this Buddhist council, there are different versions, but most scholars agree, at least one of the most well accepted school of thought says that this Buddhist council took place in Rajagriha, which actually was close to the capital of the Magadha Empire in today's Bihar, state of Bihar. And it was presided over by a great disciple of Buddha, Mahakashyapa. And then there was the second Buddhist council in 383 BC, and then the third one at the time of the great Emperor Ashoka. He's one of the greatest names in the history of Buddhist religious tradition. The fourth one was in the 1st century AD, and then the fifth one, 1871, and the sixth one in the middle of the last century, 20th century, 1954 to 56 in Burma. Now, here's something very interesting about one name that I mentioned just now, that is the name of the great king, Emperor Ashoka. That tells you something about the transition of Buddhism from a denomination within the fold of Hinduism into a distinct religious identity, the transition. Now, when you try to see the difference and the connection or relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism, there are two different views. When Buddhism began to spread outside Indian subcontinent, it absorbed many of the cultural, social, anthropological elements of the culture, tradition, and ways of life of the country where it began to spread. For example, Tibet, China, then later on in Japan and other places. So Buddhism began to take various manifestations, adopting, accepting, and accommodating, observing many of the cultural elements of these new countries and new cultures and nation states where it began to spread. That's one of the reasons why Buddhism, as you find in the early days of Buddhism in China and other countries, in the different dynasties, which actually some of them promoted Buddhism, some of them persecuted Buddhism, it underwent a number of changes. But one important phase in the evolution of Buddhism took place when one of India's greatest monarchs became a Buddhist, became a convert to Buddhism. And his name was Ashoka the Great. You can find his wheel of Ashoka, Dharma Chakram, you can find in India's flag. That's a wheel that represents the essence of Buddhist tradition. A few things about this king. He was not just a king, but a big emperor. And the important period of his timeline is, let's say, between 273 to 232. That's the period of his rule of the Magadha Empire. That predominantly what we now call the state of Bihar and UP and a number of other adjoining states. Of course, this empire itself began to spread further, and it actually absorbed a number of Central Asian states, Central Asian, what we now call Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Samarkand, all these places in the 1st century AD and later under the great Emperor Ashoka. Sorry, the great Emperor Kanishka. Kanishka was a later emperor belonging to the same tradition. So, according to some Western scholars who made very serious study of the evolution of Buddhism as a distinct religion from Hinduism, one of them is Sir Charles Eliot. He wrote the famous book, Hinduism and Buddhism, a historical sketch, 3-volume series, very important book. Hinduism and Buddhism, an historical sketch. It's a very elaborate study of the parallel growth of Buddhism and Hinduism. And I thought of referring to some of his well-known statements. He says, for example, the development of Brahmanism and Buddhism was parallel. Brahmanism here stands for the traditional Hinduism, Vedic Hinduism. That's what we call Brahmanism. So he says, the development of Brahmanism and Buddhism was parallel. If an attractive novelty appeared in one, something like it was soon provided by other. I shall give an example in this context. I'm going to quote a few verses from Dhammapada, which are very similar to some of the verses that you find in Mahabharata. And more importantly, there are striking similarities between the teachings that you find in the 26th Vagga chapter of Dhammapada and in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. In the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, for example, from 55th to 72nd verse, the 2nd chapter, it's called Sankhya Yoga. There is a very elaborate description of the characteristics of a wise man. A person with his mind well established in equanimity, let's say a philosopher in not only in academic convictions but also in lifestyle. It's called Sthita Prajna. Now Sthita Prajna Stadochyade. Siddhihi Muniruchyade. You can, this is Sanskrit in Gita you find. Him I call Sthita Prajna, a man of established wisdom, a man of settled wisdom. He is the wise man. And in Dhammapada, you can find a very similar expression, Tam Bruhi Brahmanam, 26th Varga chapter of Dhammapada, which actually is a description of the spiritual characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person, a wise man. So that's why this well-known British writer, Sir Charles Eliot, he says that Brahmanism and Buddhism evolved at parallel systems because each got enriched by the other. Now, it is something about this Greek king Ashoka. Ashoka was a very warlike monarch, an emperor, a conqueror. And there was a big battle, it's a battle of Kalinga. So, in that battle, Ashoka defeated the king of Kalinga. It happened in the Kalinga country, today's Orissa, roughly speaking. Most of Magadha Empire belonged to Bihar state, it's an adjoining state, and Orissa is another state, neighboring states. So the war of Kalinga, the Kalinga, Battle of Kalinga, the Kalinga kingdom was conquered, tens of thousands of people were massacred, they died in the battle. This tragedy had a transformative effect on the Emperor Ashoka. He became so full of repentance, crying and weeping. Now remember, interestingly, Ashoka in a way was a senior contemporary of the great Carthaginian king Hannibal. Second Punic War was between 218 to 213. That means you have to count backward before Christ, BC. You have to remember it's in BC. So 218 to 213. The important period of the war between Carthage and Hannibal. In the Second Punic War, Hannibal had 4 great victories: Battle of Cannae, Battle of Lake Trasimene, and I don't know how to go through details, not very interesting stories, which actually had a devastating effect on Roman Empire. Rome was almost completely crushed by Hannibal. Eventually, Sippo Africanus gathered forces and slowly, through some strategy or other, could manage to defeat Hannibal by delaying the battle. And finally, Carthaginians themselves betrayed Hannibal, so committed suicide. That's how Second Punic Wars came to an end, with the complete destruction of Carthage. But that did not have any spiritual transformative effect on the Roman emperor or Roman soldiers. But the Battle of Kalinga is an important event in the history of Buddhism, because Buddhism became a national religion when King Ashoka, the Emperor Ashoka himself, became a convert to Buddhism, and Buddhism was made the national religion of Magadha Empire. This is a very important event. So, this Ashoka himself became a kind of evangelist who did his best to spread Buddhism outside India. Now, about the history of Buddhist councils, perhaps that also is an important thing. In Buddhist councils, they discussed various teachings of Buddha, and some of the great monks who remembered Buddha's original teachings. Buddha mostly preached in Prakrit. Pali was the script, the language in which Dhammapada was written. It's the language of the common people. Before Buddha, or maybe the great scholars of his time, his contemporaries, mostly preached and wrote in Sanskrit. But Buddha spoke in the language of the common people. So he used the vernacular form, an unrefined form of Sanskrit called Prakrit. Now, a few things about Buddhist philosophy. This is also very important. As I mentioned, these original teachings of Buddha, recollected by the monks in the first Buddhist council, presided over by Mahakashyapa. All these teachings were recorded in Pali language, and they came to be known as Tripitakas, 3 baskets: Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka, of which Dhammapada belongs to Sutta Pitaka. These original Pali teachings became the foundation of Hinayana religion, Theravada, mostly prevalent in countries like Sri Lanka, Burma. Some of these countries preserve, some other Far Eastern countries, they preserve the Theravada Buddhism, it's called Hinayana, the more traditional or orthodox kind of Buddhism based on Pali canonical literature. Vipassana, mindfulness, all different contributions of this tradition. Of course, Mahayana also accepts so many different meditative techniques. Now, after Buddha's passing away from 2nd century AD onwards, 4 distinct schools of Buddhism developed within India: Shunyavada, Vijnanavada, Sautrantika, and Vaibhashika. Shunyavada was taught by Nagarjuna, and the most important textbook, the Bible of Shunyavada, is called Madhyamika Karika, sometimes called the Mula Madhyama Shastram, it is called. And he propounded this idea that the ultimate reality is Shunya. For example, in the Madhyamika Karika, he says, I'm just quoting a verse, Aprahinam asampraptam anuchinnam ashashwadam aniruddham anutpannam edat nirvanam uchyate. So what is nirvana? What is the nature of supreme enlightenment? So it is an experience. So an experience can never be explained. So it is called shunyam. Somebody can ask this question, how can shunya be an absolute reality? The problem is, shunya is unfortunately translated into its English equivalent, nothingness or the great emptiness. But there is always a problem of language. The absolute reality tells you that there is nothing in this world which is permanent. So that realization is actually the highest spiritual goal, which is the Paramarthika Satta in Shunyavada tradition. And in Madhyamika Karika elsewhere, and also in Chandrakirti's commentary, they frequently try to explain this, that this is a kind of inner experience going beyond empirical experiences, called Samvrti Satyam. Samvrti Satyam is almost like the Vyavakarika Satta of Advaitins. Empirical things. Going beyond empirical, when you realize Shunyata, what you realize is this reality of the impermanence of anything in this empirical existence, which makes a lot of sense philosophically and also spiritually. Now, that means something that cannot be given up. This is aprahinam, asampraptam, something which cannot be attained. So, again, the indescribability, what we call the non-definability of Brahman, of Advaitins, can be found used by Nagarjuna to explain the absolute nothingness. So this absolute nothingness is the reality from which everything in this world emerges. If it is nothingness as defined by modern English dictionary, then this world cannot emerge out of nothingness. Only nothing can emerge out of nothingness. So Shunyata in real experience implies the absence of anything in this world which is absolutely real. And if you're talking about the relative reality, then Nagarjuna will tell you it is Samvrti Satya. Samvrti Satya is the term used by Nagarjuna to indicate what Advaitins call empirical reality or our empirical experiences, which should be transcended to realize absolute reality, which is Shunyata. Now, in Chandrakirti's commentary and elsewhere in some of the Madhyamika commentaries, there is this description. Suppose you have a stomach problem, you eat a root or some kind of a medicine, maybe, many of the Buddhists were great scholars in Ayurveda, in Indian school of medicine, and also in Sanskrit grammar. And some of them also made great contribution to yoga literature, some of the yoga commentaries. So they give this example. Suppose you have a problem with your stomach, you take a medicine, and if that medicine, it can some kind of a root which they used to take in those days, the root cannot remain undigested in your system. It also should be emptied from the stomach. Like that, even the so-called definition of the word Shunya itself should be transcended to really understand what Shunya actually implies. We can remember the Shunya is emptiness. But that emptiness is something to be experienced. To experience that, you have to go beyond the word shunya. Because if you define shunya as shunya, it is not shunya actually. So what it means is the absolute reality is beyond description. And in some context, which I'm going to quote in the next sessions, in the Madhyamika text, Nagarjuna uses words which are very similar to expressions used by a great Advaita philosopher who came 300 years, maybe 200 years after Nagarjuna. His name was Gaudapada, who wrote Gaudapada Karika, which is also known as Mandukya Karika. Karika means a commentary in verses. It's a commentary written on Mandukya Upanishad, which has got only 12 verses. Mandukya Karika has got only 215 verses. So, you can find similar expressions, each running parallel to the other. In both Madhyamika Karika of Nagarjuna, which is a Bible of Shunyavada, and also Mandukya Karika of Gaudapada Acharya, is an important book belonging to pre-Shankarite period on Advaita. So, again, he says, Sarro Ubalambho Pasrama, Prapancho Pasama Shivaha, Na Kuchit Kasichit Kaschit Dharmo Buddhena Deshidaka. So what he says is, Sarro Ubalambho Pasama, that is truth, the origin and end. The absolute reality is beyond all this. It is prapanchopashama, and the word Shiva is used. Shiva, used by Nagarjuna. So Shiva means actually something auspicious. That's the real meaning of Shiva. It is not the name of a deity in this verse. Shiva is a word used to call anything which is auspicious, which brings prosperity, auspiciousness, beauty, everything that is wonderful in this world. So, this absolute reality is beyond origin, end, or existence, beyond all sankalpas. Na kochit kasyachit kaschit dharmo buddhena desidaka. So, Buddha did not teach this to anyone. So he says something, of course there is an indication, you have to read the commentary, later on we'll explain. He says Buddha did not say anything with regard to the absolute reality, with the nature of absolute reality, except that he kept quiet, he became silent by talking about the absolute reality. I mentioned this earlier, Buddha was not very much interested in metaphysics or ontology. He was more interested in what we call humanistic pragmatic values. So this is one of the idealistic schools of Buddhism which emerged in the later phase of the evolution of Buddhism. The first phase, Tripadakas, when we discuss Sautrantika and Vaibhashika systems of philosophy, which are two schools of realism on Buddhism, all major textbooks are all in Sanskrit. Though the original teachings of Buddha were written down in Pali language, the two schools of realism which emerged later belong to Hinayana system, which have Pali scriptures as the main canon. They consider Pali canon as the fundamental literature, but they also produce many books in Sanskrit. Another school of idealism, after mentioning Shunyavada, I'm going to discuss the second school of idealism belonging to Mahayana system, that is called Yogachara or Vijnanavada. Now, the difference between Vijnanavada or Yogachara, and Shunyavada is, Shunyavadins did not accept anything, not even human mind, as a reality, because everything is Shunya. But Yogacara philosophers, Vijnanavadins accepted Vijnanam. Vijnana means mind, Chittam. It's a platform on which all the experiences come and go, flash through. It is also called the Yogacara system. Of course, they produce many great thinkers. The two great names during the early phase of the evolution of the system of philosophy was Asanga and Vasubandhu, 4th and 5th century AD. So Nagarjuna belongs, roughly speaking, around 2nd century AD. And Asanga and Vasubandhu, who founded, technically they can be called the founders of Yogacara system, belong to 4th and 5th century AD. They, on the one hand, they accepted Vijnana as a reality, it's called Vijnanavada, but because they did not accept the reality of external world, it is called an idealism. So, in other words, realism, so that is Sautrantika and Vaibhashya schools belonging to Hinayana system, accepts the world of objects as real. There's a difference among them, of course, we are going to discuss later. One school accepts the doctrine, they emphasize the doctrine that external objects can only be inferred, Bahya Anumeyavadinaha they are called. And another school says no, external objects can be experienced by direct perception, Pratyaksha. Bahya Pratyakshavadinaha, who believe that external objects can be perceived and cognized by direct perception. And according to other school, it's called Bahya Anumeyavadinaha, who tell you that the external things can only be inferred, cannot be directly perceived. Simply little technical, but when we go further, we can ask questions. So according to one of the foundational texts of the early phase of Vijnanavada or Yogacara, it's called Lingavadara Sutra. Supposed to be a discussion. There are different views. They say that is a discourse between a Buddhist monk and Ravana, the king of Lanka. According to some other schools, it is a discussion between Buddha and a great enlightened seeker. Anyway, Lingavadara Sutra says, Deshemi Shunyada Nityam Shasuduchhedavarjidam Samsaram Swapnamayakyam Nacha Karma Vinasati. See, Swapnamaya, you can find the same expression in Gaudavada's Mandukya Karika. That is called Gaudavada Karika. If those who are interested, you can see there are 144 videos on Mandukya Karika. We have published from our own. We held these classes maybe I think from 2012, 13, 14, in 3 years we held this elaborate discussions on Mandukya Karika. So Gaudavada used many of the terms which were earlier used by both Vijnanavadins and also Shunyavadins. You can find expressions in Gaudavada's works which are reminiscent of many of the expressions found in the works of not only Nagarjuna but also among the followers of Vijnanavada. So Deshemi Shunyada Nityam Shasuduchheda Varjidam. There is nothing that can be called Shashuda, means eternal or immortal. And that is Shunya. That's what I am going to teach you. Samsaram Swapnamayakyam. So this world is like a dream. So again, Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta never tells you, Shankaracharya never tells you that this world is like a dream. Never. The world is a dream that you experience when you reach the highest level of spiritual experience. So, the world is a dream is an expression, that we use to explain an experience which cannot be explained. But then that's why it's called Idaredara Bantha means, or Idaredara Bheda. I want to make this clear. From Advaiti's perspective, Advaiti's point of view, when you are living in this world, there's a difference between what you experience during waking state and what you experience in dream state when you are living in this world. Because whatever you experience in dream, we don't experience the same thing as in the same manner in waking state. Whatever we experience in waking state, we don't have the same experience in the same manner in dream state. There is Idaredara Bheda, I mean distinction, difference between these two. But when we transcend all these, when you reach the highest mystical is a very inaccurate expression, but that's part of a better word, I have to use that. When you reach this, the highest experience of Advaita Anubhuti, the experience of Advaita, then empirical worldly experience, a waking state experience, and dream experience are equally unreal. But that is only a state of experience. But when you are using the word Swapna and Jagrat, dream and waking state, living in this waking state, then you have to admit the difference. But when you transcend both, then you don't see any difference. I give this example. Suppose you need 100% mark to get admission in the university. 100%. Now you may have got 99% mark. Or another person may have got only 1% or 0. Both are equally unfit to enter the university. So far as the admissibility to the university, fitness to enter the university is concerned, the one who got 99% mark and the one who got 10% mark are equally disqualified or unfit in the university. But then if you forget about entering the university and then you discuss the matter, then you certainly find that the person who has got 99% mark is certainly far superior to another one who got only 10%. So that's called Idareda Bheda. Between them or among them there is a difference, but with regard to the highest level of experience, both are equally unreal. So that's the only sense in which Advaitins can tell you that the world is a dream. That's the idea behind. That should be very well understood, the Advaitic idea. Now Nagarjuna and Vijnanavadins do not make that distinction. So far as Nagarjuna is concerned, everything is Sunya. Everything belongs to the same quality of emptiness. And that is true partly in Vijnanavada also, because both belong to the idealistic domain of Buddhist philosophy. So you have to keep this in mind. Two schools of idealism belonging to Mahayana system and two schools of realism belonging to Hinayana system, Theravada system. Two schools of idealism belonging to Mahayana system called Shunyavada and Vijnanavada. Another name is Yogachara or Vijñapti Matra. Vijñapti means this Vijnana. In this context means Chittam or mind. The realists believe, Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas believe the world is real. But one believes that the world can be experienced only through inference, Bahya Anumeyavadinaha. Another group, the other group tells you that the world can be experienced through direct perception, Bahya Pratyakshavaadinaha. Samsaram, Swapnamayakhyam, Nacha Karma Vinasyati, that Lingavadara Sutra says. Akasham Ada Nibbanam, Nirodham Dvayamevacha, Bala Kalpandi Akrutagan, Arya Nastisti Varjidaha. So he says, this world, samsara, swapna mayakhyam. Again, swapna and maya. In fact, swapna mayakhyam, the word itself, the expression itself we find in Gaudavada's Mandukya Karika. Nacha karma vinasyati. Karma doesn't come to an end because karma produces trishna, clinging to life, again which lead to next life, continuation of the samsara, continuation of the vrittis, vasanas and samskaras, again rebirth, and this transmigration continues unless you develop this Arya, Chattvarya, Arya Satyani, which again leads to nirvana by practicing eightfold disciplines that we discussed in the last session. Samyak Drishti, Samyak Sankalpa, etc. Akasham Ada Nirvanam Nirodham Dvayamevacha Bala Kalpandya Krutagan Arya Nasti Asti Varjitaha. Nasti Asti Varjitaha means. What it means is, this world was never created. Therefore, you cannot say it exists and you cannot say it doesn't exist. Because the existence, non-existence equation refers only to something which comes into existence at empirical level, exists for some time, then ceases to exist. So, practically you can find, but Vivekananda said in one context, Buddhism took the best philosophy of Vedanta and Buddha gave it a humanistic interpretation without talking much about the highest metaphysical ontological reality. But later Buddhists, who are mostly Sanskrit scholars and Vedantins or Vedic scholars, who endured Buddhist fold in India, they created a system of philosophy which indirectly took Buddhism back to the Upanishads and back to Advaita, so to speak. That's the genius of it. So Martin Luther also brought a revolt against Christianity, but he bathed the child and he threw away the bathwater, and also he threw away the child. But Buddha, on the other hand, he threw away the water, but did not throw away the child. I think that seems to be the most fitting way of finding a parallelism, historically speaking. So these Yogacara philosophers or Vijnanavadins tell you that Chittam or mind is a reality. All that we see around, all the empirical experiences, all the objects are there, but when our mind connects with all these, we see all these objects. Sarvam buddhimayam jagat, that's what word used. Now remember, today whenever you hear some very outlandish, superficial talk, something like everything is in mind, remember it is not Vedanta. They are actually bringing Buddhism. Actually it is Vijnanavada. Remember one thing. You see, it's very interesting. I can't help referring to this trend in modern times. People who got totally confused and they say going beyond mind, everything is in mind, is absolutely wrong from Vedantic standpoint. If you are a Vijnanavadi, it's perfectly okay. But you cannot say this is Vedanta. Everything is not in mind in Vedanta. This is an important point. Sarvam buddhivayam jagat. Buddhi here means chittam or mind, which is a Vijnanavada philosophy. Now Shankaracharya, the exponent of Advaita philosophy, in Brahma Sutra Bhashyas, he accepts some of the views, but he refutes Vijnanavada when Vijnanavadins tell you that this waking state is just like dream. And he gives a reason because in this waking state we see and experience. Dream we don't experience the same manner. So you can find there is a lot of realism in Advaita Vedanta. Study of Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta together will give us a clear idea of the true genius of Advaita. and also the true genius of Buddha. So that's one important point to remember. Now I shall just take a few, this beginning of our discussion, this is only the second class. So I shall just give a few samples of this close similarity between some of the great teachings of Buddhism and some of the great teachings of traditional Hinduism, Vedanta. Now we should never get away with the impression that Buddha just borrowed Hinduism. No, it's wrong to say that. Buddha was a great revolutionary. He, in a way, purified Hinduism by giving it a most humanistic interpretation. This spiritual humanism is the central theme of Buddhism. If you have any doubt, you can see how Buddha himself became Buddha. 543 different previous life cycles. In each life, you can find him displaying some of these great humanistic, compassionate characteristics. To give an example, there are many. Jataka tales are 543, 544. There are wonderful translations also, those who are interested. Just one small example. There's the story of Monkey King, the lord of a monkey. A big monkey was living in a forest. Actually, he was living on the top branch of a big mango tree. And that mango tree produced some of the most wonderful ripe mangoes, exquisite fruits. But he was a very wise person, this monkey, the Monkey King. And that mango tree grew on the banks of the river. So the Monkey King used to warn his friends, other smaller monkeys, make sure that none of the mangoes ever falls on the river. They didn't know why the king was cautioning them. It so happened that one day one of the fruits fell on the river. It floated in the river. Finally, after several miles, reached the nearby kingdom, where a fisherman got it, and the fisherman presented it to the local king. And the king was amazed at the wonderful smell and flavor and taste and sweetness of the mango. So he wanted to find out the tree where this kind of mango grows. With his retinue, his army, he marched to the forest and found a big tree, a number of monkeys all around, with a big monkey sitting on the top branch. And his soldiers began to shoot arrows and kill these monkeys. So the king wanted to save all these monkeys. It's his duty. The Monkey King is Buddha. That's how Buddha evolves. Compassion, self-sacrifice. So there was another tree across the river. So there was a branch on the other tree which they collided, and the monkey found out that if he can stretch his body from this branch to the other branch, to the other bank of the river, monkeys can walk across, stepping on his body. So the Monkey King stretched his body. It was a big monkey, and other smaller monkeys crossed across to the other side, to the other bank of the river. And then it so happened, the Monkey King became tired, he was about to die. At that time, there was another monkey who didn't like him at all to begin with. He also crossed the river, and he gave a kick to this Monkey King, and the Monkey King fell in the river. It died. And the king was standing right there watching all this. He became very compassionate, but he could not save the life of the Monkey King. And after telling this story, Buddha tells you that the Monkey King was he himself. And the evil monkey who kicked him and caused him to fall under water was one of his own enemies in this life. He was born as Devadatta. So you can find Buddha telling stories like this. So each life cycle, was an opportunity for Buddha to evolve further, to climb up the ladder of evolution towards Buddhahood. This is how it happened. So you can find so much of compassion, humanism, humanistic values emphasized in all of Buddha's teachings. And also sense control, mind control, all these ideas. Very little about God or the highest reality, nothing of the kind. But later philosophers wrote wonderful books, great, elaborate dialectical works. Nagarjuna's Madhyamika Karika. Nagarjuna himself was a great dialectician. Remember, Buddha would not have been very happy to see somebody like Nagarjuna making such a huge dialectical masterpiece of his simple humanistic teachings. He never dreamed that somebody like Nagarjuna will come after 800 years, maybe after 600 years to write a dialectical masterpiece on his teachings. So that's how Buddhism evolved into a huge, elaborate metaphysical system. One of his teaching, for example, he says, Arogya Paramalabha, Sandutti Paramam Dhanam, Visasa Paramajnadi, Nibbanam Paramam Sukham. Nibbanam Paramam Sukham. Nirvanam becomes in Sanskrit. Nirvanam in Sanskrit becomes in Pali Nibbanam. Otherwise, there are many similarities. So health is the greatest acquisition, and contentment is the greatest wealth, and self-confidence is the highest, that's best relative, best friend, and nirvana or spiritual enlightenment is a state of the highest joy and experience, and ecstasy. These are simple teachings you find in Dhammapada. Yada dvaye sudhammeshu paragu hodi brahmano adasa sarve samyoga attham gacchandi janato. Astam gacchandi becomes attham gacchandi. There are, Pali is a less refined form of Sanskrit. So Brahmana Brahmana and his characteristics are the central theme in Dhammapada. In the 26th Vagga, 26th chapter. So Brahmana here doesn't mean somebody who belongs to a particular caste or group. A wise man, a spiritually enlightened person, someone who realizes the highest truth. That's a simple meaning. So those who practice mind control, sense control, higher thinking, and all these qualities, all these dharmas, when you attain this, you become completely liberated from all bondages. Such a person is called Brahmana, means wise man, or an enlightened person. That's the meaning in Buddha. There are also similar verses in the Bhagavad Gita. So another one, aviruddham viruddheshu. Viruddheshu means viruddheshu. So sometimes Sanskrit, viruddheshu aviruddham, adadandeshu nirvrudam, attadandeshu nibbudam means Pali. Nirvrudam is in Sanskrit. So the real meaning is this: those who are friendly with their enemies, and those who are compassionate, those who are not angry with those who do harm to them. Attadandeshu nirbudam means those who do harm to you, you are not angry with them. And again, among people who are full of desire for enjoyment, sadhanesu anadana, mean those who are full of desire for worldly enjoyments, worldly pleasures, you remain totally free from all these attachments. Such a person is a spiritually enlightened person. So you can find in the Bhagavad Gita also you can find samashatroja mitreja tatha manapamana yogo sitoshna sukhadukkeshu samasanga vivarjitaka. It's actually come from Bhakti Yoga. So the highest spiritual quality of a devotee of God is the same as the quality that Buddha finds in a spiritually enlightened person. Aviruddham viruddheshu. Even towards those who are your enemies, you have absolutely no hatred. You are not against them. Adveshta sarvabhudanam maitra karuna evaja nirmamo nirahangara samadukha sukhakshami. It also comes in the Bhakti Yoga, in the 12th chapter. So, you are a friend of everyone. You don't have any hatred towards anyone. Maitra karuna evaja. You are compassionate, you are friendly towards everyone. And you have no ego. You don't consider yourself to be possessor of anything. They're also very, very similar, even the second chapter. Yasya rago padosu mano yasya ragadvesha makhocha padhito sasaporiva aragaha tamakam bruhi brahmanam. This means yasago chadaso na doso means dosha. Ragadvesha viktaistu vishayanindriyaischaran. Yasya rago vado doso mano makchaja padito. So, you don't have any kind of extreme attachment, no raga. And doso means dvesha, hatred, anger. Again, you have no ego and no deceit. And again, all these evil characteristics have completely disappeared from you. As even there is not even a mustard seed of these evil characteristics in you. Tamaham brumi brahmanam. Him I call a brahmana. So you can find in the Gita 2nd chapter. Raga dvesha viktaistu vishayanindriyaischaran atmabhasya videyarma prasadam adhigacchati. So all these qualities you can find. So practically what Buddha was trying to achieve was to give a very humanistic, compassionate, simplified interpretation of the highest Vedanta philosophy, especially as it applied in our everyday life. All the qualities that you find in a spiritual seeker, from a Vedantic perspective, you can find in an ideal monk or ideal layman who follows Buddha's path. So in the coming days we may discuss this more elaborately, because there are important books in Buddhism which are to be discussed that later. Thank you so much. You can have questions.
Thank you very much, Swami Tattwamayanandaji.
Yeah.
This is Bobby, as usual. The hosts have asked me to look at questions and answers. And if you're on the YouTube, you can post it there, and I'll offer it here on the Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
I don't see a hand up. I'll ask the first question, Maharaj.
Yeah.
You indicated some of the mythology of Ashoka, the great leader, military victor in the Battle of Linga, and referred to his adoption of Buddhism. There's a lot of mythology historically about the king that confuses Westerners in particular, who don't grow up with the stories. And the takeaway that I see is that he combines spiritual leadership with secular leadership, and that much we can confidently say that he offers a direction to the society he's leading through the spiritual leadership that he provided. The rest may be mythology, is that right?
No, difficult to believe, because if Ashoka had not become a convert to Buddhism, Buddhism would not have gone beyond the immediate geographical region of northern states. Buddhism had not become a widespread tradition. It had not gone beyond the Vindhyas, the ranges of India in the middle of India. It had not even spread in South India before Ashoka's conversion. Of course, Ashoka was a great evangelist. He was a great missionary. So he sent his own, according to one of the important sources, he sent his own daughter Sankhamitra as a missionary, and some of his own royal cousins were sent as missionaries. So Ashoka is responsible for spreading Buddhism beyond that immediate region where Buddha was traveling and preaching. It's practically a very small part of India, in the state of Bihar and some parts of Uttar Pradesh, UP. Beyond that, Buddhism had not become a popular tradition or religion before Ashoka. And Ashoka fought this battle not in his own home state, but in Orissa, Kalinga. Kalinga was the name given to the ancient kingdom, which is now known as Orissa state. It's a neighboring state. The battle was fought in Kalinga, which is not very far from the Cuttack, the capital of the state. You can still go there and find the battlefield. You can see the battlefield still there. So, and again I want to mention, there is an important edict which I don't know if I read it. No, there is a what is called the Pillar Edict 66, where he says, 12 years after my coronation, I ordered edicts of Dharma to be inscribed for the welfare and happiness of its people, in order that they might give up their former ways of life and grow in Dharma in particular respects set forth. So this is found in the Ashokan Pillar, Edict number 6. So as he put up edicts, granite pillars, stone pillars in different parts of the country. So, and he says, since I am convinced that the welfare and happiness of the people will be achieved only in this way, I consider how I may bring happiness to the people, not only to relatives of mine or residents of my capital city, but also to those who are far removed from me. I act in the same manner with respect to all. I am concerned similarly in all classes. Moreover, I have honored all religious sects with various offerings, but I consider it my principal duty to visit the people personally. I command this edict on Dharma to be inscribed 26 years after my coronation. So he put up this edict 26 years after his coronation. And you have to remember, there were Greek ambassadors, historians, who were present in Ashoka's court. Not in Ashoka's court. There's a big, his predecessor called Chandragupta Maurya. Megasthenes was an ambassador in Chandragupta's court, the same empire. Megasthenes' works are still available. Of course, this was before Ashoka. So, and Ashoka's Thamba, called Ashoka's edicts, are found in different parts of India.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
There may be others, but the only Western equivalents I can think of who were military leaders who had that kind of impact on spirituality. The only ones that come to mind are Moses and Charlemagne. And but after that, there may be others, but I can't think of them.
Yeah. Could you repeat what you said just now?
I said, apart from Moses and Charlemagne, I can't think of any Western
that's true. That is true. Yeah.
Who were military leaders who had that kind of breadth of spiritual impact.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, it was a very important event, not only in the history of Buddhism, but also in the history of India. And again, one important point, Buddhism was completely accepted by traditional Hindus. So if Buddhism disappeared eventually in India, it was because it was so fully accepted And Buddha was himself observed as an incarnation of God in traditional Hinduism. This is something very interesting. It's not that it disappeared. Buddhism as a separate religious tradition lost its separate identity, not because it was wrong, but because it was considered to be a great enriching factor, which enriched and made Hinduism more dynamic. This is a very, you can imagine, for example, the papal authority in Rome inviting Martin Luther to Rome and making him a divine, canonizing him. Of course, he did not accept, he completely gave up the whole concept of canonization. But still, can you imagine, though he rejected it, Buddha did not formally accept the authority of the Vedas, which is the foundation of Hinduism. But Hindus, what they did, Hinduism, what it did, it observed Buddha as a great spiritual person within Hinduism, almost like the traditional Judaism accepting Christ as one of the Hebrew prophets, like Elijah or like Moses himself. What would have happened? Of course, it would have happened, but for Roman Empire. That's a different thing, historically speaking. If you read about Constantine's conversion and Christianity became more Romanized than Romans became Christianized. It's a different story. So what I mean to say, Buddha himself was accepted. You see, Shankaracharya in his work, Buddhasya Paramartha Darshinaha. So Paramartha is it's an adjective is used. The one who has seen the supreme truth. Buddha is described as the one who has seen supreme truth in the Mandvikarya Bhashya. Buddhasya Paramartha Darshinaha. Buddha, the one who has seen and experienced the ultimate truth. So that's a very important point to remember. I think it's a different kind of Hinduism failed in this genius of observing people. Many Greeks came, many Central Asians came. When it had to deal with the Islamic religion, which began to make inroads in India in the 8th century AD under Muhammad bin Qasim, who was the first invader, invaded Sindh. That was a time when Hinduism came in contact with a different tradition which we did not believe in this idea of mutual harmony. Buddhism was very harmonious. You can imagine. The problems in Burma and Sri Lanka started only when they had to confront with an absolutely completely violent creed. Otherwise, they would have remained as non-violent as they ever were. So you have to remember this, very interesting. Precisely that's the reason why Hinduism welcomed Judaism, Christianity, and also Zoroastrianism in 7th century AD, and also the Arab traders who visited India in the southwestern coast and who had become Muslims in this the late 6th century, 7th century, the late 5th century, I think the late 5th century AD. They used to come as traders even before the emergence of Islam. After the emergence of Islam also they continued coming, and they had given a place to build a mosque, the second oldest mosque in the world you can find. It belonged to 625 AD. So you can find in the same manner Buddhism was observed. So because each of these traditions enriched India, and Hinduism also looked upon them as the enriching elements and an enriching, refining force. Buddhism, in a way, refined Hinduism, made it more dynamic, really speaking. Yeah.
Maharaj, there's a parallel question, just asking for a clarification on the YouTube live stream.
Yeah.
The question seeks the relief from possible misunderstanding. Quote, I thought the genesis of Buddhism was a response to Brahmanism with the intent to reform the latter.
There was no genocide of Buddhism anywhere in India. Absolutely no. The most well-known instance of genocide happened.
No, Maharaj. I'm sorry, I'm not very audible. The question refers to the Genesis.
Oh, the Genesis.
Genesis, yes. So the question is, was the genesis of Buddhism a response to Brahmanism with the intent to reform the Brahmanism?
That's true. Absolutely true. Yeah. Very, very correct.
Okay.
Buddhism was a reform movement against some of the orthodox practices of Hinduism. Very similar to maybe some of the practices of the Jewish priestcraft. Jesus Christ, the emergent Jesus Christ represents a kind of reform movement within Judaism. Because it was appropriated by the Roman imperial hierarchy, it lost its nature completely. That's what happened. You can think of Christianity without Saint Paul, who has never seen Jesus Christ, and Constantine, who came in 325, the Council of Nicaea. Think of these two, think of Christianity without these two instances, And Christ had nothing to do with Saint Paul, actually, Saint Paul had not seen Christ, and Constantine, as a man, had nothing Christian about him, had everything unchristian about him. As an emperor, he was a military tactician, strategician. He used this as a tool, as a ruse to unify the Romans against the barbarian attacks. So the Huns. So I think we have to look at the whole thing from a historical perspective, as I frequently do. We can see, just imagine, think of Christianity without Saint Paul and without Constantine. That's what happened to Hinduism with regard to Buddhism. But then Buddhism had an entirely different history outside India. But there again you have to remember, we are talking about Nalanda University, which is now being recreated. There were a large number of students from China and Tibet studying in Nalanda. And many of the great Buddhist texts, originally written in Sanskrit, were recreated, retrieved into the form, in the original form, with the help of ancient Chinese translations. The contributions of great Indologists and Buddhist scholars like Ajima, Nakamura and others cannot be forgotten in this context. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. David, appreciate your patience, and please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello, Swami.
Yeah.
I had a question. Actually, I have a couple of questions. Was Ashoka? Two questions. One was he a Hindu at first?
Yeah.
And secondly, did he use force to convert people to Buddhism?
Never. That's the greatness of Ashoka. He was so steeped in non-violence. In fact, historically, he's the first person to start hospitals for animals in the history of the world. Hospitals for animals. So Ashoka was so much steeped in non-violence. I tell you, some of the later Buddhist emperors, kings and emperors who followed Buddhism, who were Buddhist, became sometimes very violent when they had to defend their country. For example, the Palas, when Muhammad bin Qasim invaded Sindh, the local kings were Buddhist. Some of the early kings in Bengal were Buddhist in the time of Senas, when Muhammad Bhaktiar Khilji attacked Bengal and destroyed, massacred the dynasty. So, Lakshmana Sena, the Sena dynasty in Bengal. So, they were all Buddhists. I tell you, if you read Vivekananda, you find some very interesting statements. Some statements are quite too blunt. Buddha saved a few goats, the price we had to pay were the degenerates of the masses, You see, there are statements like that. What happened, Buddhism became a great religious tradition based on non-violence and dharma. Absolutely wonderful. But the point is, when India had to confront enemies coming from a different culture, who followed a different style of warfare, especially you will be surprised if you read Mahabharata, it's very humorous, somewhat funny, comedy. You find they used to fight during daytime. In the evening, they used to sit together and do Sandhya Vandana, the ablutions. Next day morning, Arjuna will blow his corns. They begin again. More like a circus or drama in modern times. More like Olympics tournament, something like that. The athletes will play games, computer games, football games in the evening. Next day again they will compete. Like that, that was the style of warfare during Mahabharata time. This was long before the emergence of Buddhism. After Buddhism also this continued. But I tell you two important events. One is the first invasion of Delhi took place under Muhammad Ghori, who was defeated twice by Prithviraj Chauhan. But in some of the ancient smrtis, there are statements you should never chase a fleeing enemy, and you should never kill an imprisoned warrior, imprisoned enemy. So he was imprisoned and let off next day, and within a year he came back, and at night to stealth, he was attacked from midnight and massacred the local king. So the point is, there are wonderful ideas, wonderful observations made by some of the early historians of India, Vincent Smith, and also the Cambridge History of India. They find Indians were fighting holding dharma ideal, more like Mahabharata. One reason is they became so like hermits living in their own little small place without any understanding of what is happening in the neighborhood, other countries, other nations. This happened. Swamiji refers to that. So they became totally oblivious of what is happening. New forms of warfare, the role of cavalry in modern warfare. Indians were still depending upon the huge number of elephants, which were actually liability in any warfare, because a huge collection of a number of elephants will be a liability against a well-trained cavalry of especially Arabian and Persian horses. So became in many of the Indian army with huge elephant collection became a cannon fodder behind their train. This Alexander's, there was a great Pyrrho. Pyrrho was a great historian who accompanied Alexander. He makes these statements. The bravery and courage is there, but then the Indians depended so much on elephants, which became a liability. Elephants, if they shoot an arrow at an elephant, it will turn back and it will trample over its own soldiers. This happened very often in battlefield. So Indians sometimes were not very modern, not very much alert about what is happening around. This is what happens here. This is a different area of study, which is not within our scope. But one thing is that Buddhism was a wonderful spiritual movement which did a great service to Hinduism, made it more dynamic, and also focused on some of the problems of society, Hindu society, casteism. For example, a large number of people were not allowed to wear arms because they belong to lower caste. This sort of classification of society, social injustices, some of these problems were exposed, and they were reform movements ever since Buddha's advent. Okay, thank you.
So Swami, the others, then it sounds like the major difference between Ashoka and Constantine was Constantine used violence to convert to Christianity, whereas Ashoka did not.
No. Ashoka never. There was no compulsion on even to become Buddhist. No compulsion. Absolutely no. It not even heard of Buddhists ever using violence to convert anyone. No.
Okay. Thank you, Swami.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, David.
May I tell you something interesting? The early Christians who came to Kerala in the 1st century AD, they also were totally non-evangelical and non-proselytizing. You find there are still remnants of that society, totally non-proselytizing and non-evangelical. They don't go about preaching, they don't go about converting, they do that. So ancient, we absorbed all some of these great values of ancient India. Okay, thank you.
So Swami, what you're saying is interesting, that Christianity, if you leave out St. Paul and Constantine, Christianity is almost like Buddhism.
Precisely, it could have become like Buddhism, Yeah, because Christ, the language used by Christ is slightly more compassionate and less. I don't want to say the language of Elijah and language of Christ. Two different contrasting examples. Elijah is very uncompromising style of conversation, and Christ was all forgiving, compassion. But belonging to the same Hebraic prophetic tradition, but there was a need for a more humane approach that you find in Christ. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Mark, you're next. Thank you. Okay, Mark, we see you.
Yeah.
We hear you. Now we
Okay,
see.
sorry.
Yeah.
Good evening, Swamiji.
Good evening. Yeah.
I'd like to talk about Buddhist meditation.
Yeah.
We know that the Buddha gave us the Eightfold Path, and we know that today we have different types of Buddhist meditation. We have Vipassana, we have mindfulness, and many different types of Buddhist techniques of meditation. I was wondering how those would contrast with the type of meditation that Vedanta teaches. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about Buddhist meditation.
Yeah. The overall psychological effect of the meditative practices on Buddhism and Vedanta are the same. But there is one difference. In Buddhist meditation, the ultimate goal is to keep the mind in a state of total equilibrium, non-attachment, and awareness. You're aware of it, we're totally free from any kind of entanglement, non-attachment. In Vedantic meditation, you want to transcend all these. When you reach this level of total awareness and total non-entanglement, detachment, what happens is you realize one supreme truth about your true nature. Now, it is put in that language. So what is nirvana is explained in Buddhism. So when you attain nirvana, you are getting liberation, enlightenment. So you are getting out of something and you are getting something. You are attaining something. What do you attain? Nirvana. And what is the nirvana? You realize the truth that everything in this world is impermanent. Vedanta points out there is something which is not impermanent. And that something is you yourself. Not the body-mind complex, but something that is present in you, present everywhere. In Buddhism, that point is not mentioned. So, who attains nirvana, who gets this blissful experience, which is the effect of nirvana, that is not clearly defined. When we discuss this, later, when we will be discussing Vipassana, we will be discussing Satipatthana Sutta. It's an important text of mindfulness, Buddha's discourse. At that time, we will discuss the idea. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. I don't see any more questions, but I am looking at the calendar, and I'm wondering if we're going to continue each Sunday during the Christmas, end of December season?
Oh, I am planning to continue these classes during December season, except January 5th, it may not, we won't be able to hold this class because we have a retreat, winter retreat, 4th and 5th of January 2025. 4th is Saturday, 2 sessions on Saturday, and 1 session on Sunday. So these 3 sessions with 1 hour lecture each time and half an hour Q&A that we held in the new temple Vivekananda Hall, 2323 Veluga Street. And the subject is in a way linked to this, spiritual values for the IT age. In a way, Vedanta, Buddhism all will come because this Buddhism is playing a very important role, a positive role in modern times, bringing this element of meditation, going beyond all that, awareness, all that, going beyond mind, how to keep the mind in a state of awareness and non-attachment. So we'll be discussing all this during these 3 sessions. So there will be no class on 5th January Sunday. Otherwise, we'll have classes, okay?
Okay, Maharaj, so there will be class next Sunday, the 22nd, and also on December 29th.
Yeah, 22nd we'll have classes, yeah. Thank you.
Very good. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. I will let you know, I don't have calendar with me, but please, Moni, please look at our website homepage. As of now, we are planning to have classes throughout. So we will have class next Sunday. Most welcome. Thank you.
So pending further notice, that's the plan.
Yeah.
Check vedanta.org for updates.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishnaarpanamastu. Thank you for these your response questions, which actually make this session more enjoyable and more helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, Mal. Thank you, David, everyone. Thank you. Yeah.